brings us to today's topic. We've got our little trivia questions aside, so now let's jump into the meat of the program. What we're going to do is we're going to do some rapid, quick facts on Generation Z to give some context, some facts about this generation, some trends that they're seeing, and then we'll get into the best ways to communicate and connect with Generation Z with all those quick facts as context. And where this research is coming from is basically three different buckets. The first bucket would be secular research on how best for teachers to teach Generation Z in the classroom, whether that's at college or elementary level. The second bucket of research, we'll call it, is employment, how employers have found to best manage or delegate to or hire and fire Generation Z. And then what we'll call the third bucket is the Christian worldview research, whether that's John Stone Street with the Colson Center, Jeff Myers with Summit Ministries, Josh McDowell with all the research he's able to do, the Christian leaders who are really looking at worldview in today's kids. So those are the three buckets, in class, at work, and from a Christian worldview perspective. So let's jump in. These are the definitions, which you have on your sheet. Mostly today we're going to be talking about baby boomers and Generation X compared to Gen Z. So when you say, like in a conversation, the phrase an older person, what does that mean? It's usually a polite way of saying you're old, right? Today that's not when we say an older generation, we're talking about Generation X and the baby boomers. So 44 and up is where a lot of what we're calling the older generations compared to the younger Generation Z. You can see they're 26 to 13. I'm basically the youngest millennial, so my sisters and everybody below us is Gen Z. We're not going to talk about Alpha because there's really no research on them yet, they're too low. There's 68 million members of Gen Z in America right now. Now, is there any one statement or one descriptor that you could make for 68 million people? They're alive, they need to eat. You say anything other than that, and it's not going to be accurate for at least one of those persons, right? So, a good reminder that today we're talking in generalizations. This is trends that we're seeing, or commonalities, things like that. 4% has a strong biblical worldview, we talked about that. They're the first generation to have a screen-based childhood. The previous, everybody before Gen Z had what was called a play-based childhood. That's what the professionals call it because, a little kid, what is a little baby? They want to grab something and mess around with it and eat it. And then a little kid wants to go and grab something they shouldn't and go play with it. And then a 10-year-old is on their bike. And then a 14-year-old is maybe getting a dirt bike. Like it's a play-based childhood, even if they're just playing with sticks and rocks. Generation Z was the first to have a screen-based childhood. They spent way too much time on their screens and they not knowing anything other than the internet. They didn't know, they would be shocked to know that the internet is only 20 years old, 30 years old, whatever it is. They're like, no, the internet's been around forever. It's a part of life, it always has been. So that's something to keep in mind. Only 1/3 say they're comfortable taking risks. Whether that's in a job or in life. 71% say they know that they're going to experience failure, and they're okay with that. Which is a little bit encouraging. If only 1/3 are okay with the risk, but 71% say, you know what, we know we're going to fail at something and that's okay. That's a little bit encouraging. They have a much higher entrepreneurial drive than previous generations. They want to start their own thing, do their own thing, be their own boss, launch their own platform, start their own brand. I was talking with a couple people beforehand that they've heard some research that they're not very good at initiating things, which it's a catch-22. Maybe they don't always initiate things, but they really want to be an entrepreneur and start something cool. They often admit they don't feel prepared for the real world. Now, obviously, say, well, yeah, for kids, of course they're not prepared for the real world. But what's interesting is that they often admit it. Yeah, I don't have what I need. Opportunity there. Only 1/3 attend church at least once a month. So Barna, when they do their research, they say, hey, do you attend a couple times a year? Do you attend at least once a month? And only 1/3 would fall into that. Yeah, I attend at least once a month. Numbers are pretty low. They're the most compassionate generation on record. This is a big one for later. Keep this in mind. We're also going to talk about the fact that their compassion hasn't been well formed or well taught. So they're very committed to it. They're very passionate about being loving, compassionate, kind people. But maybe that hasn't been well formed or well educated. We'll get to that one later on in the program. Only 16% are glad to be Americans. Like they're just really proud of it. They're glad. 40% say they often feel lonely. Pretty high number. How often are they on their phones? Texting, talking, Facebooking, Skyping, you name it. They're always talking to somebody, right? They maybe aren't realizing it yet, but they're finding out that this isn't the real connection you need. What's interesting is they really appreciate face-to-face communication. And what the researchers are finding is that they appreciate it much more than they initiate it. So they really want face-to-face, real human connection, just like the rest of us do. But they all too often just pick up their phone instead. Again, is there opportunity there? There's huge opportunity there. So with that, a little bit of that context and background, we're going to talk about three things: credibility, accuracy, and delivery. I was hoping to play a video for you guys, but it didn't work. So we're going to imagine this scenario instead. So you pull up, let's say, a YouTube video of a pastor. You know in the title what the topic is going to be. So you're watching the first minute or two of this video. You don't know anything about this pastor. So in your mind, you're trying to create a first impression of this guy. Do I want to keep listening? Do I want to know what he has to say, right? All of us naturally do that. Do I actually want to hear this person? You're probably going to ask some question like, hey, is he actually an authority on this topic? Is he actually legitimate, or is he someone random? Is this guy a legitimate authority on the topic that I want to hear from? You're probably going to ask some question along those lines, right? And then if you answer that question, okay, this guy has some sort of authority and research to be speaking on this topic. The next question you're going to ask is, okay, with his accuracy, is he going to give me the truth, the facts? Is he going to explain it right? Right? Does this guy know what he's talking about? Is he going to give me the accurate information? Okay, if so, I want to know the detail. Is it fair to say that that's a general framework for what we would all go through in that first 30 seconds or maybe a minute of listening to a new pastor, watching a new video, something like that? That's the common pathway. Generation Z is not asking those questions, not making those analyses. It looks totally different for them. So with the previous context we talked about, we're going to jump into these three comparisons for credibility, accuracy, and delivery. Perceptions of credibility. The older generations are very familiar with the concept of authority. They're familiar with terms like legitimacy, whether or not something's legitimate, and they're very familiar with a formal hierarchy. Your boss has the authority to tell you yes or no. And then the studies have looked at the perceptions of authority. For example, the traditionalist generation had a very high respect for authority, whether that's a pastor, or parents, or a boss, or a governmental leader. And they taught that respect to their kids, the baby boomers. The baby boomers generally accepted it, had a pretty high regard for authority, but every once in a while would throw out phrases like, hey, never trust anybody over 30. You get to Generation X, and again, they had kind of a high respect for authority, but also were skeptical of the formal workplace because of all the layoffs and stuff that they experienced. So you see this like swinging pendulum, but mostly towards respect for authority. Generation Z looks at that pendulum and says, why do we even need a clock? I don't even need to know which side of the pendulum I'm on. So older generations are very familiar with the concept of authority. If you're thinking about a pastor, you may be wondering about his moral authority to speak on a certain topic, his education, his formal background, etc. Generation Z views credibility through the lens of authenticity. They want to know about your real life experience and your passion. A couple of really interesting studies they've done on this. Again, we'll go to that bucket of research with teachers teaching kids. This applied to college students and elementary. They found the same results. They surveyed all the kids, or a section of them, and said, what's most important to you about a teacher? The most effective teacher, the best teacher? The most common answer, we want a teacher that cares. What does that mean? We'll dive into that. They want a teacher that cares about them, cares about the topic, etc. When they asked the teachers, what do you think about this feedback? They got a lot of negative reactions, as you can imagine. They said, well, we have to implement intensive mothering. The kid leaves the house and now we have to be their mom. Is that what they mean? We want to care for them? I only have so much time to prepare lessons and do my best to teach these lessons. Do they want me to go out to coffee with each one of them and explain how much I care about them? The teachers were starting to get frustrated because, as you can imagine, their job is to teach, not I'm not your therapist, I'm not your mom. So they continued to dig deeper. And they asked the kids, okay, when you say teacher that cares, what does that mean? And they would explain things like taking the lesson plan seriously, actually having a little bit of energy to bring to the topic, talking about real life experiences or real life stories. And they asked, okay, how would you describe a teacher that doesn't care? They would say, well, they didn't prepare for the lesson. They showed no energy. They really just read from the lesson book and didn't explain anything. They didn't ask if we were understanding the topic, they just kept reading the lesson plan. Those descriptions I just gave you, how would you describe that teacher? Just read from the book, didn't bring any energy. They're not taking the job seriously, right? They shouldn't be teaching. They're not putting any effort in. They're not working hard. So it's super interesting that us and Generation Z agree on the best type of teacher, but use totally different words to describe it. They use emotionally fragile language, a teacher that cares, for something that we would say, a teacher that takes their job seriously, a teacher that actually put effort into teaching, who brought a couple cool life stories, who paid attention to whether or not the kids are learning. So I think that's one theme that we'll continue to see is Generation Z using, we'll call it emotionally fragile language to describe something that we would all agree with. So rather than a teacher with authority, they don't necessarily care how many degrees you have. They want to know about your real life experience and your passion. They want an authentic teacher. One interesting caveat to talk about here. I was talking with Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries, and I asked his thoughts on this authority versus authenticity, what Generation Z is looking for. He said, you're onto something, but also keep in mind Generation Z has a nasty tendency to believe the first thing they hear from wherever it is, which all of us can fall prey to, but they seem to do it a little bit more often, which again, is there opportunity there? Of course. Next, we'll look to accuracy. Older generations ask if something is true. A lot of you are probably, duh. I don't want to hear something false. I want to hear something phony. But it's important to talk about. They want to know if something is true. Because we're all familiar with objective fact, confirmable truth, things like that. This is exactly where I'm at. I don't care how much you are passionate about your idea. I want to know if your idea is true, accurate, and right. Older generations are very familiar with this. Basically, everybody except Gen Z. Generation Z doesn't have time to talk about whether or not it's true or right. They want to know something's useful. They want results and practicality. This is where that practicality comes in. In their mind, they don't have time to sit around and pontificate about the correct answer, the right answer, the good answer. What's going to work? Tell me how to do it. That's all I need to know. We'll move on to the next thing. Dr. Josh McDowell, a few years ago, pointed this out. He says, previously, everybody said that if it's true, it will work. Now it's, if it works, it's true. And that sounds like semantics, but it's very, very important. Basically, everybody in this room knows the first version. If it's true, it will work. Basically, if you adopt a true life principle, work it out in your life, you'll see results. Generation Z is the other way around. They go looking for results, and whatever that person did to get them there, that must be true. Really interesting comparison to keep in mind. That's the practicality we talk about. They're just looking for something helpful, useful, get me to the finish line. John Stonestreet, I think he has a doctorate yet, with Colson Center. John Stonestreet with the Colson Center said, be careful when you're talking with millennials and Generation Z. Because for you and I, if there's a worldview that just has all of the answers to all of life's questions, well, then that must be the right one. For a lot of today's young kids, if you have all of the answers for something, you have an agenda. You're not actually trying to help me. Really important to keep in mind. Because I get excited the more and more things I see. Okay, Christianity just has all the answers. The biblical model fits for every question in life. It just works itself out. We all get excited when we realize it has all the answers. For Generation Z, we need to maybe scale back that excitement and maybe see how it's coming across to them. If we look to the secular research on this idea of relativism and moral relativism, basically whatever works is true, even secular researchers are finding that this is a trend, and their explanation for why is that it's basically a coping mechanism. Josh McDowell said that your kids will have more challenges to their faith by the time they're 12 than you did when you went off to college, and you weren't even ready for it then. Today's kids will have way more challenges to their faith, to their belief, to their worldview, way earlier, way faster. Compare that to what the secular research is saying. It says basically with the internet and all the competing voices and worldviews and ideas and religions, today's kids don't have an answer for why their worldview or their religion is better than all the other ones. So they said, well, it must all be good. I can't give you all the answers. This is mine. That's yours. We're good. So some of this morally relativistic worldview is a bit of a coping mechanism because they don't have all the answers. Before we move on from this topic, I want to give a couple slides from Barna, which these are from their Gen Z booklet. I highly recommend this book. It's written on the notes side of your sheet under recommended resources. Barna Research, the Christian group, they really, really do quality work. A few pieces taken from this book. This is the percentage agreement with right and wrong changes over time. See baby boomers on the left, Generation X, millennials, Gen Z. A steady increase of those who say right and wrong changes over time. Agreement with lying is morally wrong. Again, you can see more and more relativistic thinking, basically. It's not morally wrong. I'm not going to do it, but I can't say it's morally wrong for you. Really important context to keep in mind. Preference and delivery style. This is learning styles, information consumptions, etc. A lot of older generations prefer to learn in an environment where you get all the detail and really understand the topic. Honestly, kind of like today. We're going to sit down, we're going to talk about this for a little while, we're going to come away with a better understanding. When surveyed and done research of when people in their middle of their career go back to school, what kind of learning fits them best and what fits their mind the best, they found professional seminars and workshops. Again, a place where you can go and immerse in the topic for a set amount of time and come away much better equipped. That's how I learn. That's how a lot of people learn. Generation Z, everything's got to be fast. Everything's got to be bite-sized. Everything's got to be flashy. One thing that's important to remember here is with their short attention span, it's not just preference or laziness or lack of desire to learn. Again, if you look at all the scientific secular research, growing up with these is literally changing their brain structure. So it's not just that they've decided, oh, I don't have time to watch this video. They haven't trained themselves to stay on the topic for very long. And if you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of companies trying to make the coolest, flashiest, best advertisements, videos, ideas, programs, bombarding them every day, it's a competition to keep their attention. And that's what their brain has literally become adjusted and accustomed to. Their attention span in class is sometimes 7 to 10 minutes. It's pretty short. We already talked about online, 8 seconds. Before they decide either, yes, I'm going to finish watching this, or nope, I'm done, next thing. Have you heard of the phrase keyword spotting? This is what kids today, when they're looking for an answer online, they Google a question, and there's all these different websites that pop up on Google, right? They pull up the first one and see if there's relevant information on that website that might give them their answer. If they make that first impression of, yes, this website might have my answer, they stay. Or if they say, no, it doesn't look like this is the right website, then they bounce back to the Google page, right? And they keep going down the list. It's called Keyword Spy. It allows them to quickly glance at, 5, 8, 10 different articles, pages, etc. Right? Kind of makes sense. You want to skim through things. How long would you say, on average, they spend on a website keyword spotting before they make a decision? 2 seconds. Yep. You know what's really interesting? On our website, or any website really, when you're tracking your website traffic, there's a category called bounce backs, which is they stay 2 seconds or less. So literally websites are designed, they don't even track that as a real person, or as they meant to click here. Generation Z is so fast that websites assume, no, they didn't even mean to click here. That's how fast their attention span is, mostly with online content. Now, in person, you'll probably see, again, classroom in 7 to 8 minutes, face-to-face. Again, they appreciate face-to-face communication. So there's still hope. It's not that you can be having a conversation with them and 30 seconds later they're off in La La Land. They still want real connection with real people. One thing that Jeff Myers talked about with all his kids at Summit Ministries, he goes, you know what? I'm real blunt with kids. I look at them and go, you need old people. Or old people need you. And honestly, Generation Z realizes that. Have any of you guys watched any of the Dry Creek Wrangler videos? Have you ever heard that name before? There's an old cowboy from down south that's really going gangbusters online right now. His videos are getting thousands and thousands and thousands of views. He doesn't talk fast, he doesn't have anything flashy. He literally sets his camera on something and sits down in his saddlebag to talk about a life lesson. And it's going gangbusters. So again, back to that authenticity. Yeah, they have a short attention span, but they'll still sit down and watch an old cowboy sit in his tack shop and talk about a life lesson he's been thinking about. So with these 3 topics we've talked about, the idea of accuracy, how we perceive it versus how they perceive it, credibility, then accuracy, and then delivery, we see 3 contrasts. Authority versus authenticity, it's important to keep in mind. Truth versus practicality. Again, I'm not saying this is good that they believe this way, it's just how they're out. A lot of times, again, we're talking generalities today. And detail versus speed. You and I want to know the details. We want the information, we want it unpacked. Generation Z, you've got to hook them. If you're doing especially online content or a blog post or an article, you've got to get them quick for them to stay. So with these 3 in mind, there's some things that we could implement to more effectively communicate and connect with Generation Z. Remember that they're searching for authenticity. So convey your life experiences rather than your position. Now for those with life experience and wisdom, are you able to easily share life experience? Of course. It's fertile ground. If you've got life lessons, good stories to tell, lessons you learned that it worked right, and it didn't also right. Just maybe don't lead with your position and your authority of why they should listen to you. Now for the pastors, I'm not saying never assume you have biblical authority. You obviously do to preach the word. But lead with authenticity while you've got real life experience. They're searching for something helpful. Explain why the information or advice you're giving them actually works. Something to keep in mind here. You and I, when we adopt a worldview, or when we commit to a worldview like Christianity for most of us here in the room, I remember as a kid deciding, like, yes, I believe in Jesus, I'm adopting this worldview, And as I've grown up and gone along, I keep confirming more and more pieces of that worldview. The more research I do, the more I learn, the more I read, the more of my Bible I know, the more I see things work out in real life. More and more pieces of my worldview keep getting confirmed, right? For Generation Z, they're not looking to adopt a worldview and then confirm the pieces. All of the pieces of all of the worldviews are thrown out like Scrabble pieces. And they're going along picking up pieces of this worldview and that worldview and this worldview, because those are the pieces that look like they're working. So again, does biblical truth, if worked out in your life, actually work? Yes, of course. So it's not that we can't talk about biblical truth or the right and wrong answer. But what if we just flip the script and say, hey, this is something I went through last year. Tell them the story, and you just explain why it worked. And then you know what? If coincidentally it just so happens to also line up with biblical truth, you've now helped them adopt one more piece of a biblical worldview. So rather than trying to convince them to adopt the whole worldview, and then, hey, we'll confirm the pieces as we go along, we have to more build piece by piece through authenticity and explaining why it's actually going to work out in your life, to piece by piece build that biblical worldview into their life. And then finally, realize they may get distracted quickly. If you're doing online content especially. If you're making things, it's got to be well produced, fast. I think a good analogy of this would be, if you get 4 emails, you wake up, check your email on a Tuesday morning, you've got 4 emails. Are you going to have time to see what's in each of those 4? Sure. If you wake up and you have 400, are you going to have any interest in the 10 people who said, watch this 40-minute video? It doesn't matter how close of a friend you are, how much you love them, how much you're in the top of these guys. I don't have time to watch all 10 40-minute videos. I've got 390 other emails I have to get to before I get to work. That analogy is a lot of times how Generation Z is with all the notifications they're getting on their phone. So if you've got an interesting email thread that you want to forward to a young person, or an article you want to share, or a video, you can share it, but just keep in mind that in their mind, it's going to be like one of those 400 emails that you opened on Tuesday morning. So find a way to explain why it's really impactful in your life, or why it can really connect with what they're going through. Again, convey that authenticity, because they get bombarded with stuff. So if they see a group email was forwarded to them, no interest. You sent it to 30 people, you even forgot I was on that list, I'm not even reading your email. But just like all of you, if you get an email from me or from a friend, and you can tell right away, wait a second, that's not a bulk email, that's not their e-news, he actually has a question for me as a person, you're going to open that email first. And you're probably going to read it, and you're going to delete all of the other spam mail. So we can't do mass communication to Generation Z, we have to do individual communication, and then build it onto a larger scale. So if you're doing group texts, email threads, their attention span, they're just probably not going to open it. They might not read it. They might not watch the whole video. So with these 3 contrasts in mind, I think we can be a lot more effective when reaching out to Generation Z, trying to connect with them, and honestly helping them build a more comprehensive biblical worldview. Rather than convincing them to adopt it and then helping them confirm the pieces, we just have to go piece by piece and help them build that biblical worldview.